What if a rose perfume did not want to smell like a rose? What if instead of giving you petals, romance, softness, and beauty, it gives you soil, spice, darkness, and something almost ritualistic? And Le Mat may be the most un-rose-like rose perfume I've ever smelled. The rose is no longer simply a flower, it becomes a question. If a rose no longer appears in the form of rose, is it still a rose perfume? Let me give it a try. So Le Mat, I think is fascinating because on the surface, it still follows a rose patchouli structure, but it does not treat rose as a romantic, feminine, delicate, or refined flower. Instead, it places the rose inside a drier, more mysterious, more earthy, and even slightly secret ritual space. To me, its deconstruction of rose begins first with the identity of the rose itself. Traditional rose perfume often presents rose as a complete and recognizable object. Fresh rose, dewy rose, jammy rose, pottery rose, velvet rose, oriental rose, and so on. But the rose in this one is not a flower placed at the center for worship. It is more like a rose that has been dismantled and reburied in soil, spices, hay, and resinous structure. It is not about reproducing a rose. Rather, it is about smelling the spiritual after image of a rose after it has gone through time, erosion, burning, dryness, and decay. What matters most is that Le Mat does not allow the rose to preserve its floral purity. Black pepper, clove, and nutmeg break apart the sweet edges of the rose, making it spicy and rough. Patchouli pulls the rose downward into soil and the underground, whether damp or dry. Immortelle brings in hay, the honey, curry-like warmth, and the feeling of plants scorched by the sun. From this perspective, what Le Mat deconstructs are the most common fantasies surrounding rose perfumes. The fantasy of love, the fantasy of femininity, and the fantasy of natural beauty. This is not a rose for a lover, and it is not a rose could present a refined, elegant, perfectly trimmed rose garden. Its rose is more like a rose carried by a wanderer, a madman, a diviner, an ascetic, or a poet. So the most artistic aspect of Le Mat lies in the fact that it is not merely representing a realistic rose, but questioning why the rose must always be represented in a certain way. In the history of perfume, rose has been too easily coded: noble, romantic, sensual, feminine, classic, French, orientalist, erotic, and so on. Le Mat's approach reassembles the strategy of defamiliarization in probably contemporary art. It keeps the symbol of the rose, but places it in a very uncomfortable context, forcing you to realize again that rose does not naturally equal romance. A rose can also be dry, dusty, mysterious, bitter, medicinal, and almost religious. I would understand it as an anti-bouquet rose. The logic of the traditional bouquet is to arrange flowers, package them, and present them to the viewer. The logic of Le Mat is closer to taking the bouquet apart and throwing it into soil, spice, medicinal herbs, and then seal it with an old wooden box until it becomes something like a relic or a talisman. So if this were a rose-themed perfume, then rose should be the clearest, most persistent, and most voluminous presence. But in Le Mat, recognizing the rose requires patience, focus, and sometimes even doubt about whether it is truly there at all. A material that is supposedly the theme of the perfume would not normally hide itself this deeply. As time passes, you begin to question whether the rose really exists or whether it ever exists. Perhaps it is only a hallucination. Philosophically, the chaotic quality of Le Mat comes from a state of suspension. In tarot, the fool is always at the moment of about to depart, but has not yet arrived. So his identity is undetermined. His direction is unclear, and the scent structure of Le Mat recreates precisely this state of suspension. You can never be certain which material is leading at any given moment. The rose flickers in and out. The spice hides in the shadows. The outline of immortelle never becomes truly clear and crystal. And Mendittorosa interprets the Fool card as an enigmatic, irrational presence open to all paths, all possibilities, pointing to no single best route and no definite destination. And the chaos here is not a design flaw, it is the direct olfactory expression of the perfume's philosophical core. So this brings me to an art historical question. When rose is no longer represented as an image, but reorganized as material, trace, and even just a kind of energy, can a rose perfume still be called a rose perfume? And this question reminds me of Rothko's painting in the context of abstract expressionism. His color-filled painting often feel like spiritual space. When the viewers stand before them, they are not simply looking at an object. They are surrounded, absorbed, and pressured by fields of color, and sometimes forced to confront an emotion that cannot be clearly named. Le Mat works in a similar way. It does not ask you to identify this is rose, this is patchouli, this is immortelle, and instead it lets these materials melt into a deep red, black-brown, golden, dry field of scents. Rose is no longer an object inside the image. It becomes more like a red field on a Rothko canvas, without clear contours, without details, but still the emotional center of the whole space. In this sense, Le Mat is not a rose in still life format, but a Rothko-like rose color field. Rose here is not a precisely rendered petal, but a dark red spiritual weight. Therefore, I would not call Le Mat a rose perfume in the traditional sense. It is more like a Rothko-like rose. It has no outline of petals, but it has the weight of rose. It transforms rose from an object to be admired into a space one can enter. And in this sense, it pushes rose into a more abstract, more spiritual place. And that's my thoughts on Le Mat. Thank you for watching. I'll see you next time. Bye bye.